Have you ever wondered if one small decision could change dozens of lives without anyone ever knowing? Drew Lawson was only a few steps away from the last flight home to watch his 10-year-old daughter perform when one strange moment forced him to choose between keeping a promise and protecting complete strangers. What happened that rainy night would uncover a truth buried for 4 years, test one father's character, and prove that sometimes the greatest journeys begin the moment you miss the flight you were supposed to catch. At 9:46 p.m., Drew Lawson was running through Chicago Midway with one hand gripping the strap of his worn backpack and the other holding his phone. Final boarding call for Flight 617 to Louisville, the overhead speaker announced. On the screen, Molly's face bounced with every step he took. His 10-year-old daughter was sitting cross-legged on her bed in Kentucky, her violin case open beside her. "You're still going to make it, right?" she asked. Drew glanced at the gate sign ahead. B-22. Less than 100 yards. "I'm almost there," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "Get some sleep. I'll be in the front row tomorrow." "You promised." "I know." Thunder rolled beyond the terminal windows. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the runway lights into long red and gold lines. Travelers crowded around charging stations and departure boards while exhausted children slept across suitcases. Drew ended the call and pushed forward. Then he smelled it. Sharp, cold, faintly bitter. He slowed near a children's play area beside two closed restaurants. A maintenance door stood behind a row of vending machines. Thin white frost clung to its lower metal edge, though the terminal was warm. A janitor nearby leaned against her cart, coughing into her sleeve. Her eyes were watering. "You all right?" Drew asked. "Cleaning stuff," she said, waving him away. "Somebody must have spilled something." Drew looked at the floor. It was dry. The boarding agent's voice echoed from gate B-22. "Doors will close in 3 minutes." He could see the gate now. He could also see a little girl crawling through a plastic tunnel in the play area while her mother searched through a diaper bag. Drew stepped toward the maintenance door. The cold around it was wrong. So was the haze gathering near the vent above the children. His phone buzzed. Molly had sent a photograph of an empty chair in the school auditorium. "Your seat," she had written. Drew stared at the words, then at the gate. 4 years earlier, he had noticed warning signs everyone else dismissed. Speaking up had cost him his position, his certification, and nearly every stable job since. He told himself this could be nothing. Then the janitor coughed again, harder this time. Behind Drew, a woman's voice spoke so softly it nearly disappeared beneath the boarding announcement. "Drew Lawson." His body went still. He turned. Claire Whitman stood beneath the cold fluorescent lights, holding a thick gray folder against her chest. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, but the face was unmistakable. She was the woman who had signed the report that destroyed his career. At the gate, the agent reached for the door. Beside the play area, the white haze thickened, and Drew had only seconds to decide which direction to run. The boarding door was still open. Claire Whitman stood 10 feet away, her gray folder pressed tightly against her chest as if she had carried it for years. "Drew," she said again, louder this time. "Please, don't walk away." He stared at her without answering. 4 years disappeared in an instant. Conference rooms, accident reports, lawyers. The sentence that had followed him into every interview afterward. Shows poor judgment under pressure. Another boarding announcement echoed across the terminal. "Flight 617 to Louisville is preparing for departure. This is the final boarding call." His feet wanted to move toward the gate. Instead, his eyes drifted back to the maintenance door. The frost spreading across the metal wasn't normal. Neither was the bitter smell lingering in the air. The janitor coughed again, bending over her cleaning cart. A young mother nearby looked up for only a second before returning to zip her son's jacket. She hadn't noticed anything unusual. Most people never did. That was how dangerous problems usually began. Invisible, ordinary, easy to ignore. Claire followed his gaze. "What are you looking at?" Drew didn't answer immediately. "You smell that?" She took a cautious breath. She frowned. "Maybe cleaning chemicals?" He slowly shook his head. "No." The answer came automatically, long before he thought about it. His years around industrial refrigeration had trained his senses before they trained his hands. Temperature, pressure, airflow, smell. Tiny changes that most people dismissed had once been his entire career. His career. The thought landed like a weight in his chest. Claire looked as though she wanted to say something else, but Drew cut her off. "Why are you here?" "I've been trying to find you." "For 4 years?" "For 14 months, he frowned. "What changed 14 months ago?" Claire swallowed, but before she could answer, another fit of coughing echoed from the janitor. This one was worse. Drew watched her steady herself against the wall. His instincts screamed louder. He looked toward the gate once more. Passengers were disappearing down the jet bridge. He imagined Molly setting her violin case beside the school auditorium stage tomorrow morning. She would search the audience before she played. She always did. He had never forgotten the look on her face 6 years earlier when he missed Family Day at her elementary school. She had smiled anyway. That somehow made it hurt even more. His phone vibrated. A message from Molly appeared. "Good night, Dad. Don't forget your seat." He closed his eyes for one brief second. Then he slipped the phone into his pocket. Claire noticed the hesitation. "You're flying home?" "My daughter has a concert." She nodded quietly. "I know." That surprised him enough to look directly at her. "How would you know that?" "I know more about your life than you probably realize," she admitted. "Not because I've been watching you, because I've been trying to apologize." The words didn't soften anything. Not yet. An apology couldn't return 4 years. It couldn't replace birthdays worked through, or weekends canceled, or every interview where someone politely thanked him before choosing another candidate. The overhead lights reflected off the polished floor. A little girl laughed inside the play area. Then she stopped. She rubbed her eyes. Drew's heart tightened. He looked back toward the maintenance door. The haze wasn't drifting anymore. It was spreading. His breathing slowed. The same calm always arrived just before he made difficult decisions. Not confidence, focus. Behind him, Claire quietly asked, "What are you going to do?" Drew never answered. He was already walking away from gate B22. He stopped beside the maintenance door and pressed the back of his hand near the metal surface. Cold, far colder than it should have been. The janitor looked at him with tired eyes. "You maintenance?" she asked between coughs. "No," Drew replied. "How long have you been feeling like this?" She shrugged. "Maybe 10 minutes. My throat burns a little." He looked up at the vent. The white haze drifted lazily along the ceiling before disappearing beneath the bright terminal lights. Most people would never notice it. Drew had spent nearly 2 decades noticing things everyone else ignored. Claire caught up with him. "Drew, listen to me." "Not yet. You're still doing it." He glanced at her. "Doing what?" "Looking at the problem before looking at me." His jaw tightened. "That habit cost me everything." She lowered her eyes. "I know." Before either of them could continue, a woman hurried past carrying a toddler on her hip. The little boy rubbed both eyes and buried his face against her shoulder. Drew watched them disappear toward the food court. His stomach knotted. A uniformed airport employee rolled a cart toward the corridor. "Sir," the man called, "you can't stand in front of that service entrance." Drew stepped aside. "Who's responsible for refrigeration in this terminal?" The employee blinked. "I don't know. Facilities, I guess." "Can you call them?" They're probably already on another job. Please. The employee hesitated, then reached for his radio more to end the conversation than because he believed there was a problem. Claire studied Drew's face. You really think something's wrong? I think something isn't right. Can you tell what? Not yet. She looked toward the frosted door. You haven't even opened it. I don't need to. She frowned. How can you be so sure? Drew took a slow breath. When a refrigeration system starts failing, it talks before it screams. Claire said nothing. He continued watching the vent. The temperature changes first, then the airflow, then the smell. If you're lucky, that's all you get before something worse. The airport employee lowered his radio. Facilities says nobody has reported an issue. Drew nodded once. They haven't looked. The man gave an uneasy laugh. Sir, these systems are monitored 24 hours a day. So was the last one. The words slipped out before Drew could stop them. Claire closed her eyes. You're talking about North River. He turned toward her. For 4 years, every interview started with the same question. He could still hear it. Tell us about the incident that ended your supervisory certification. Every hiring manager had spoken politely. Every conversation ended the same way. Someone else had been selected. Not because he lacked experience, because a report bearing Claire Whitman's signature said he couldn't be trusted when pressure was highest. She held the gray folder tighter. I brought something. I don't want it. You haven't even seen it. I spent 4 years wishing you'd looked at one report more carefully. I'm done looking at yours. The radio crackled again. Another voice answered this time. Luis is on his way. The airport employee nodded toward Drew. Our maintenance guy should be here in a minute. Drew looked once more toward the gate. The jet bridge door had disappeared from view. The flight home was leaving without him. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Molly. No words this time, just a picture of her violin resting on the kitchen table, ready for tomorrow morning. Drew slipped the phone back into his pocket before he could answer. Footsteps echoed across the polished floor. An older man in a maintenance jacket approached, carrying a flashlight and a ring of keys clipped to his belt. His name tag read, Luis Mendoza. He looked from Drew to the frosted door. What seems to be the problem? Drew pointed quietly toward the vent. I hope I'm wrong. Luis followed his gaze. Then, for the first time, the confidence left the maintenance man's face. You're seeing that too, Luis said quietly. Drew nodded. The frost shouldn't be there. Luis walked closer without touching the door. He raised his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the hinges and the vent above. That line was serviced last week, he murmured. It passed inspection. Who did the work? A contractor. Luis looked uneasy. I wasn't on shift. Drew leaned toward the vent, careful not to get too close. The airflow isn't right. You can tell that? I can hear it. Luis listened. At first there was nothing but distant conversations, rolling suitcases, and the soft music drifting from a nearby cafe. Then he caught it. A faint, uneven hiss. Not loud. Just wrong. Claire stepped beside them. What does that mean? Drew answered without taking his eyes off the vent. It means something is escaping that shouldn't be. The airport employee who had called Luis shifted impatiently. So what now? Get the area cleared, Drew said. The man folded his arms. Without authorization? Drew didn't respond immediately. He had heard that question before. Not in an airport. Inside a warehouse nearly 4 years earlier. He could still picture the red warning lights reflecting off polished concrete floors at North River Cold Storage. Pressure readings climbing. 2 sensors refusing to agree with each other. One forklift driver rubbing his eyes and saying the air felt strange. Everyone else insisting production couldn't stop because 3 trucks were already waiting outside. Drew had ordered the evacuation anyway. No shouting, no panic. Just a calm instruction to leave the building. He remembered standing alone afterward while supervisors argued about delayed shipments instead of asking why he had made the call. 24 hours later, he found himself sitting across a conference table from Claire Whitman. She had looked tired, professional, certain. She never called him reckless. She called him emotional. The word stayed on every report that followed. Emotional under pressure, poor judgment, unsuitable for supervisory authority. Those words reached every employer before Drew ever walked into an interview. They reached Molly too, though she never read the report. She felt it every time another weekend job replaced a family picnic, every Christmas Eve emergency call, every promise that began with, "I'll try." A child's laugh snapped Drew back to the terminal. The little girl inside the play area stumbled as she climbed out of a plastic tunnel. Her mother caught her before she fell. "She skipped dinner," the woman said with an embarrassed smile to another parent. Maybe she had. Maybe that explained it. Or maybe it didn't. Drew reached into his pocket. His fingers found the small blue toolbox keychain Molly had clipped onto his backpack that morning. The raised letters brushed against his thumb. Fix it right. He closed his hand around it. For a moment, he could almost hear Molly's voice. Then come home. His chest tightened. He wanted both. He wanted to be the father sitting in the front row tomorrow morning. He wanted to be wrong about the terminal. He wanted 4 years erased. None of those wishes changed what stood in front of him. Luis looked at Drew again. "What would you do if this were your system?" Drew answered without hesitation. "I'd stop people from walking into it." At that exact moment, a little girl inside the play area began coughing, not once, again and again. Every head in the corridor slowly turned toward the sound. The little girl bent forward, coughing into both hands, while her mother knelt beside her. "Sweetheart?" the woman asked. "Look at me." The child blinked several times before rubbing her eyes. "It stings," she whispered. Luis looked back toward the maintenance door. "I don't like this." He slipped a ring of keys from his belt and took one cautious step forward before stopping again. Something's definitely colder than it should be. The airport employee frowned. Facilities would have seen an alarm. "Not every failure trips one," Drew replied, "especially if the problem started after the last repair." Luis nodded almost instinctively. "He's right." The employee looked between them. "You know this guy?" Luis shook his head. "No, but I know refrigeration." For the first time since Drew had stopped running toward his gate, someone besides him was treating the situation as more than an inconvenience. Claire quietly opened the gray folder she had been carrying. She wasn't reading it. She simply held it tighter, watching Drew with an expression somewhere between regret and disbelief. "You're doing exactly what you did before," she said softly. Drew didn't ask what she meant. He already knew, ignoring everything except the facts in front of him. No anger, no panic, just evidence. He pointed toward the ceiling vent. "See how the haze isn't rising?" Luis narrowed his eyes. "It should be dispersing. It isn't." The older maintenance worker took another careful breath and immediately frowned. "I smell it now." "So do I," Drew answered. Luis reached for his radio. "This is Mendoza in Concourse B. I need a supervisor near the children's play area. Possible refrigeration issue." Static. Then a calm voice answered. "Supervisor Grant is on the way." Only a few moments later, a woman in a Navy airport operations jacket hurried down the corridor. Her name badge read, Keisha Grant. She took in the scene quickly. Parents, children, a maintenance worker, an unfamiliar man standing beside a frosted service door. "What do we have?" she asked Luis. He hesitated. "This gentleman believes we may have a refrigeration leak." Keisha turned toward Drew. "And you are?" "Drew Lawson." "Airport employee?" "No." "Contractor. No. She folded her arms. Then why should I rely on your assessment? It wasn't hostile. It was practical. She had a crowded terminal, delayed flights, and hundreds of passengers depending on every decision she made. Drew understood that. I've spent nearly 20 years working commercial refrigeration systems, he said evenly. The signs here aren't normal. What signs? The frost, the smell, the coughing, the temperature around that door. Keisha looked at Luis. Do you agree? Luis answered honestly. I agree something needs to be checked. Checked, Keisha emphasized. Not evacuated. Drew glanced toward the play area again. The little girl was no longer playing. She sat quietly beside her mother with watery eyes while another child began coughing near the slide. His heartbeat slowed instead of quickened. That always happened when a difficult decision was getting closer. Keisha spoke into her radio. Send the refrigeration technician assigned to Concourse B priority response. A reply came almost immediately. He's 25 minutes out. Weather delayed him on another call. 25 minutes. Drew looked at the children, then at the maintenance door, then at the departure board where Flight 617 had changed from boarding to gate closing. He slipped one hand into his jacket pocket, his fingers wrapped around Molly's small blue toolbox keychain. The raised letters pressed against his palm. Fix it right. He closed his eyes for only a heartbeat. When he opened them again, the choice waiting in front of him felt painfully familiar. 25 minutes. That was what the radio had said. The assigned refrigeration technician was still 25 minutes away. Drew looked at the children. 25 minutes could be nothing. Or it could be everything. Keisha followed his eyes. I've already called for the right people, she said. Until they get here, nobody opens that room. Nobody has to open it, Drew replied quietly. She frowned. What are you saying? We need to move people away from this area. Her expression hardened. You're asking me to relocate families, shut down 2 restaurants, and interrupt operations based on a smell. Not just a smell. The frost, the coughing, the temperature, the airflow. He pointed toward the vent. And whatever's collecting up there. Keisha folded her arms. If I clear this concourse and you're wrong, hundreds of passengers miss connections. Flights get delayed. Panic spreads through the terminal. And if I'm right, neither of them answered. Luis slowly stepped closer to the maintenance door. He held one hand beneath the vent for several seconds. His face changed. The air's colder now, he said. It wasn't like that 5 minutes ago. Claire watched Drew instead of the door. You've seen this before. He nodded once. Too many times. She lowered her voice. Is that why you evacuated North River? Drew's eyes never left the play area. Yes. And nobody listened. They listened. He paused. They just listened after it cost too much. A little boy wandered toward the edge of the play area, dragging a stuffed dinosaur behind him. Halfway across the rubber floor, he stopped. He coughed. Then he coughed again. His mother hurried over, lifting him into her arms. Buddy. The boy buried his face against her shoulder. Luis looked at Keisha. I think we should at least clear the kids. Keisha hesitated. Airport operations taught people to trust procedures. Procedures said to wait for the certified technician. But every instinct in the corridor was beginning to say otherwise. Her radio crackled. Grant, status? She pressed the button. Still investigating. Any confirmed leak? No confirmation. Then hold your position until refrigeration arrives. The transmission ended. Drew slipped his hand into his jacket pocket again. His fingers wrapped around the small blue toolbox keychain Molly had made. The raised letters pressed into his palm. Fix it right. His thumb moved lower. Then, come home. For one painful second, he imagined Molly tomorrow morning, standing backstage, scanning the audience, looking for the empty seat with his name on it. His phone vibrated. The lock screen lit up without him touching it. A new message. Love you, Dad. See you tomorrow. He swallowed hard. Claire noticed the screen. You can still make your flight. He looked toward gate B-22. The last few passengers were disappearing through the jet bridge. The boarding agent reached for the door. Then Drew looked back at the children. One little girl had started rubbing her eyes again. The janitor was coughing so hard she had to steady herself against her cart. His decision was already made. He unclipped the blue toolbox keychain from his backpack and closed it tightly in his fist for just a moment, as though borrowing courage from the tiny gift Molly had made with her own hands. Then he handed his backpack to Claire. If I'm wrong, he said, you can tell me for the rest of my life. Before anyone could stop him, Drew crossed the corridor, reached the red emergency alarm pull station beside the play area, and pulled it down. A sharp alarm echoed through the concourse. Parents froze. Children looked up. Keisha's eyes widened. Luis immediately began waving families away from the play area. Everybody this way, he called. Please keep moving. Claire grabbed Drew's backpack as the boarding door at gate B-22 slowly swung shut across the terminal, without a single passenger running toward it, without waiting another second. The last flight to Louisville left without Drew Lawson. The shrill alarm echoed through Concourse B, replacing the ordinary sounds of rolling suitcases and casual conversations with confusion. Parents instinctively reached for their children. Luis raised both arms. Please move away from the play area. Nice and calm, everyone. This way. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent years guiding people through problems without making them panic. Keisha grabbed her radio. Dispatch, this is Grant. I need airport fire and environmental response at Concourse B immediately. Possible refrigeration leak. Begin precautionary relocation. The reply came almost instantly. Confirmed. Units en route. She looked at Drew. You'd better be right. I hope I am, he answered. That would make two of us. Within minutes, bright yellow emergency tape stretched across the entrance to the children's play area. Families were guided toward another concourse. The little girl who had been coughing was now sitting in a wheelchair offered by airport medical staff. Her mother thanked Luis over and over, though neither of them knew yet whether anything serious had happened. Drew stayed back. He watched quietly. He had learned long ago that once the professionals arrived, the smartest thing a technician could do was get out of their way. Airport firefighters entered through the service corridor wearing protective equipment. Luis unlocked the maintenance door. Cold air rolled out immediately. One firefighter stopped, looked at a handheld monitor, and turned toward his team. Let's isolate this section. No one raised their voice. No one ran. But everyone suddenly moved faster. 15 minutes later, the first report reached Keisha. She read it twice before lowering the paper. A cracked valve, she said softly. Luis looked at her. And? The ventilation controls installed during last week's repair were wired incorrectly. He closed his eyes. So the air wasn't exhausting. Keisha nodded. It was circulating. She looked toward Drew. You saw it before any of us. Drew didn't answer. There was nothing to celebrate. The danger had been real. That was enough. An airport police officer approached. Mr. Lawson? Yes. We need a statement. Since you activated the emergency alarm, we'll need to document everything you observed. Of course. The officer's tone remained professional. You're not under arrest. We just need the timeline. Drew nodded. He understood procedures. He had once trusted them. As he followed the officer toward a nearby interview room, his phone vibrated inside his jacket. He already knew who it was. He looked at the screen. Molly. The message contained only 5 words. Did you make it home? His thumb hovered over the keyboard. He typed, deleted it, started again, deleted that too. How could he explain that he had chosen strangers over the seat she had saved for him? How could he tell a 10-year-old that sometimes doing the right thing still meant breaking a promise? He slipped the phone back into his pocket unanswered. As he reached the interview room, something brushed against his shoulder. Claire handed him his backpack. "I caught it before it fell," she said. Drew thanked her quietly and reached for the zipper. His hand stopped. The small blue toolbox keychain wasn't there. He searched every pocket. Nothing. He looked back toward the emergency tape surrounding the play area. Somewhere between pulling the alarm and helping families move to safety, Molly's gift had disappeared. For the first time that night, his composure cracked. Not because he had missed the flight, not because he might spend hours answering questions, but because the one thing his daughter had made with her own hands was lying somewhere beyond the closed maintenance door. Claire watched the realization settle across his face. She took a slow breath. "I didn't spend 14 months looking for you just to hand you an apology." She placed the thick gray folder on the table between them. "I came because there's something inside this file that should have been yours 4 years ago." Drew looked at the folder, then at Claire. For the first time since hearing his name whispered in the terminal, he realized she hadn't come to ask for forgiveness. She had come carrying the truth. The interview room was quiet except for the muted voices outside and the distant hum of airport ventilation. Claire slid the gray folder across the table. "I've carried this everywhere for more than a year," she said. "I kept thinking I'd finally find you. And then I never knew what I'd say first." Drew rested his hand on the folder, but didn't open it. "You've had 4 years." "I know." "No." His voice remained calm, which somehow hurt more. "You had 4 years. I had to live them." Claire lowered her eyes. "I deserve that." He looked at her for a long moment. "You signed the report." "I did." "You told everyone I couldn't be trusted." "I did." "You knew that report would follow me." "I knew." Silence settled between them. There were no excuses left in the room. Claire finally spoke. 2 years after you left North River, there was another refrigeration failure." Drew looked up. She continued carefully. "Not as large as it could have been, but 4 workers were hospitalized. The investigation reopened maintenance records going back several years." She reached into the folder and removed several copies of engineering logs. "I was asked to organize old inspection files. That's when I noticed something that didn't make sense." She pointed to a column of numbers. "These pressure spikes should have been here." "They weren't," Drew said quietly. She nodded. "They had been filtered out." He frowned. "What do you mean, filtered?" "The monitoring software had been configured to ignore short pressure fluctuations after every restart. Your readings disappeared from the reports everyone reviewed." Drew stared at the page. "They called me emotional because the numbers weren't there." "The numbers were there," Claire whispered. "Just not in the report they showed us." His jaw tightened. She continued. "I asked for the raw data, and they told me it no longer existed." Drew gave a tired smile that held no humor. "So that was the end of it." "It should have been." She slowly pulled another document from the folder. But one backup server had never been erased. He looked at her. The original data survived. Outside the room, footsteps hurried past as emergency crews continued working in the concourse. Claire waited until the hallway grew quiet again. "When I saw those files, I realized something I should have questioned years earlier." She took a slow breath. "You didn't overreact. You were right." Drew closed his eyes. Not from relief, from exhaustion. For 4 years he had replayed that night over and over, wondering if fatigue had clouded his judgment, wondering if he had ruined Molly's future because he had trusted instincts no one else believed. Claire's voice trembled. "They offered me a settlement." His eyes opened. "What kind of settlement?" "A large one." "For what?" "So I'd sign a confidentiality agreement and stop asking questions." You refused. I resigned the next morning. She folded her hands together. Since then, I've been trying to locate everyone whose career was damaged by those reports. Everyone? There were several. She looked directly at him. You were the only one I couldn't find. Drew leaned back in his chair. For the first time since Claire had reappeared in his life, he believed every word she was saying, but believing her wasn't the same as forgiving her. He looked toward the closed folder. If the data proves I was right, he asked quietly, why are you saying it saved people? Claire didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled out one final page, a list of names, 23 of them. She gently turned it so Drew could read the first line. These, she said, are the people who would have started the next shift if you hadn't evacuated that warehouse. Drew's eyes stopped on the page. One name caught his attention before all the others. Angela Ruiz. He had never met her. Yet somehow, that name felt as though it was about to change everything all over again. Drew looked up from the page. Who is Angela Ruiz? Claire folded her hands together. She worked the overnight loading shift at North River. He searched his memory. I don't remember her. You wouldn't. She wasn't on duty yet. Claire tapped the list gently. When you ordered the evacuation, the second shift had already left. The third shift hadn't entered the building. She slid another document across the table. This roster shows who was scheduled to clock in 23 minutes later. 23 names. Every one of them had walked into work expecting an ordinary night. Every one of them had unknowingly stayed outside because Drew had refused to ignore what he saw. He read the list again. Not numbers. People. Parents. Neighbors. Workers trying to make a living. Claire's voice was almost a whisper. You kept thinking you shut down a warehouse. You actually stopped 23 people from walking into a dangerous building. Drew stared silently at the paper. For years, he had measured that night only by what it had cost him. His career, his certification, his weekends with Molly. He had never imagined measuring it by the lives that simply went home. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. Luis stepped into the room. Sorry, he said. They finished isolating the system. Keisha followed behind him. The environmental team confirmed elevated refrigerant levels inside the service corridor. If we'd waited... She stopped before finishing the sentence. Her eyes drifted toward the folder on the table. I didn't mean to interrupt. Claire looked at Luis. Can I ask you something? He nodded. Is your mother's name Angela Ruiz? Luis blinked. Yes. How do you know her? Claire slowly turned the roster toward him. Luis stepped closer. His eyes landed on the name. Then on the date. His forehead creased. My mom worked that shift, he said quietly. She always talked about one strange night. He looked at Drew. She said everyone was sent home before they even clocked in. She never knew why. Drew felt something tighten in his chest. Luis continued. She used to tell us there must have been somebody inside who cared more about people than production. He gave a small laugh. She'd always say, if somebody on the floor tells you something feels wrong, listen before you look at their title. His smile faded. I guess she was talking about you. The room fell silent. Drew looked away. He had spent years believing that night ended with a signature on a report. Instead, it had quietly continued inside 23 families who never even realized they had been protected. Luis took one slow breath. My mom retired last year. She still volunteers at our church pantry every Thursday. He shook his head in disbelief. She has no idea who you are, Drew answered softly. She doesn't need to. Luis looked at him with new understanding. No, he said, but I do. Outside the interview room, an airport employee appeared in the doorway holding something small in a clear evidence bag. Mr. Lawson, Drew stood. We found this near the emergency alarm. Inside the plastic bag was a small blue toolbox keychain. The metal ring had snapped. The words Molly had written were scratched, but still readable. Fix it right. Drew closed his fingers gently around the bag. For the first time that night, he smiled. Only for a moment. Then he turned back toward Claire. There's still one question you haven't answered. She met his eyes. He spoke quietly. What are you willing to lose to make this right? Claire didn't answer immediately. She looked through the interview room window toward the terminal, where airport employees were rolling up emergency equipment and parents were settling frightened children with cups of water and quiet reassurances. Only then did she turn back. Everything that's left, she said. Drew studied her face. There was no anger in his own expression anymore, only exhaustion. You've already lost your job. I resigned. That wasn't my question. Claire nodded slowly. I know. She opened the folder again and removed a sealed envelope addressed to the Federal Occupational Safety Administration. I've already signed my statement. Drew looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. I identified every report I approved without demanding the original censor logs. You named everyone involved? I named myself first. The words settled heavily between them. I told investigators I chose deadlines over questions. Nobody forced my signature onto those reports. She drew another document from the folder. This one goes to the State Licensing Board. He read the first line. Voluntary disclosure of professional misconduct. If I submit this, Claire continued, my compliance certification will almost certainly be suspended. You're sure? No. She gave a faint, weary smile. I'm terrified. That makes two of us. For the first time that night, they almost sounded like two ordinary people instead of two lives divided by one decision. Claire folded her hands. I can't give you back 4 years. No. I can't give Molly the birthdays you missed. No. I can't erase every interview where someone read my report before meeting you. Drew's eyes drifted toward the blue toolbox keychain resting inside the evidence bag. Its metal ring had snapped clean through, just like something else he had spent years trying to hold together. Claire followed his gaze. I heard about your daughter. She plays violin. She does. I also know tomorrow morning matters. He gave a tired laugh. It mattered yesterday, too. Silence returned. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Finally, Drew spoke. You know what hurt the most? Claire waited. It wasn't losing my certification. It wasn't the overtime. It wasn't starting over. He looked down at his hands. It was wondering if maybe everyone else was right. He paused. I spent 4 years asking myself whether I'd imagined the danger. Claire's eyes filled. You didn't. I know that now. But you let me believe it then. She nodded once. I did. And you'll have to live with that. I will. There was no argument, no request for forgiveness, only acceptance. A gentle knock came at the open door. Keisha stepped inside. I didn't mean to interrupt. She looked at Claire, then at Drew. The incident report is finished. She placed a copy on the table. We're implementing an immediate review of every refrigeration maintenance contract in this terminal. She hesitated. And until that's complete, frontline employees have full authority to stop operations whenever they identify a credible safety concern. Drew looked up. You're changing the policy? We're changing the assumption, Keisha answered firmly. We've spent too much time believing titles notice danger before experience does. She turned toward Drew. You saw what all of us walked past. Luis appeared behind her, holding a small padded envelope. I had someone in maintenance fix this as best they could. He handed it to Drew. Inside was Molly's blue toolbox keychain. The scratched plastic had been carefully cleaned. A stronger stainless steel ring now held it together. Drew closed his hand around it. The words were still there. Fix it right, then come home. He smiled quietly. Then he looked back at Claire one last time. You're finally doing the right thing. He slipped the keychain into his pocket. But doing the right thing doesn't mean the damage disappears. Claire nodded. I know. And I'm not asking you to forgive me. No, Drew replied softly. You're going to earn whatever comes next. Outside the window, dawn was beginning to lighten the edge of the runway. For the first time in 4 years, the truth was no longer hidden. Now everyone would have to decide what to do with it. Dawn crept slowly across the runway, turning the rain-soaked tarmac from black to silver. The airport had begun returning to its ordinary rhythm, but Drew felt as though the night had stretched into another lifetime. Keisha walked him to the customer service desk. The first flight to Louisville leaves at 6:25, she said. I've already arranged a seat. The airport held you here for the investigation. You're not paying for another ticket. Drew nodded. Thank you. You earned it. He almost argued. Instead, he simply accepted. Some kindnesses didn't need to be refused. As Keisha walked away to answer another radio call, Drew finally unlocked his phone. 3 missed calls, 2 messages, both from Molly. The first had arrived just before midnight. Made it home from rehearsal. Love you. The second had come an hour later. Don't stay up too late. His thumb hovered over the screen. No words felt good enough. He pressed the call button. It rang twice. A sleepy little voice answered. Dad. Hey, sweetheart. You're awake. So are you. She gave a tiny laugh. I was waiting. The words landed harder than anything Claire had confessed. Drew looked out through the terminal window. I need to tell you something. You missed your flight. He blinked. How did you know? You always call before you get on the plane. She paused. You didn't. He smiled sadly. You're getting too smart. I learned from you. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Drew took a slow breath. I had a choice tonight. What kind of choice? There were some kids near something that wasn't safe. He searched for words a 10-year-old could carry without fear. I thought somebody might get hurt if nobody spoke up. Molly was quiet. So, you stayed? I did. You knew you'd miss my concert? Yes. Another long silence. Drew closed his eyes. I know I let you down. When Molly finally answered, her voice sounded older than 10. Dad? Yes? Did you fix it? He felt his throat tighten. We stopped people from getting hurt. Then you fixed it. I guess we did. She breathed softly into the phone. You always tell me if something's broken. Pretending it's okay doesn't really fix it. He laughed through damp eyes. I did say that. So, I'm still sad. I know. But I'm not mad. Those 4 words lifted a weight Drew had carried since the alarm first echoed through the terminal. I'll still be there, he promised. The concert starts at 9. My plane lands after 8. I'll run if I have to. You're always running. Not tomorrow. He smiled. Tomorrow I'll be running toward you. After they said goodbye, Drew slipped the phone into his pocket. Someone cleared his throat behind him. Louise stood there holding a small padded envelope. I wanted to give this back myself. Inside rested Molly's blue toolbox keychain. The cracked ring had been replaced with a thicker stainless steel one from the maintenance shop. We figured this one won't break as easily, Louise said. Drew turned it over in his hand. The scratches remained. So did the words. Fix it right, then come home. He smiled quietly. Tell your mother something for me. Louise nodded. Tell her. The man she thanked all those years never expected anyone to remember. Louise smiled. She'll remember now. Outside, The first Louisville flight of the morning rolled toward its gate. For the first time in years, Drew wasn't boarding a plane carrying doubt. He was carrying the truth. And he hoped, somehow, that would be enough when Molly looked into the audience. The flight landed in Louisville just after 8 that morning. Drew barely noticed the applause when the wheels touched the runway. He was already reaching for his backpack before the seatbelt sign disappeared. Every minute mattered. He hurried through the terminal, skipped the coffee line, and climbed into the first taxi waiting outside. "Jefferson Elementary," he said. "Please." The driver glanced at the clock. "Big morning?" "The biggest." The streets were still damp from overnight rain. School buses filled the intersections. Parents crossed sidewalks holding little hands, and yellow leaves danced across the pavement in the cool Kentucky breeze. Drew checked his phone. The concert had already begun. He closed his eyes for a moment. "Can you get me there?" The driver smiled. "I'll get you there safely." That was enough. When the taxi stopped in front of the school, Drew thanked the driver, grabbed his backpack, and hurried through the front doors. Music drifted down the hallway. A volunteer standing outside the auditorium raised a finger to her lips. "They've already started." Drew nodded quietly. "I know." He slipped through the back doors without making a sound. The lights inside were dim except for the warm glow covering the stage. Rows of parents filled the folding chairs. Some held flowers. Others held phones. There wasn't a single empty seat near the front. Drew remained where he was, standing against the back wall with his backpack still over one shoulder. On stage, Molly stood with her violin beneath her chin. She was already halfway through her solo. Her hands were steady. Her bow moved with quiet confidence. For one heartbreaking second, she lifted her eyes from the sheet music and searched the audience. Drew saw the familiar disappointment begin to cross her face. Then her eyes reached the back of the room. They found him. He didn't wave. He simply placed one hand over his heart. Molly's shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. Without missing a single note, she smiled and continued playing. When the final note faded, the auditorium erupted into applause. Drew applauded harder than anyone. A few minutes later, children spilled into the hallway surrounded by parents and grandparents. Molly ran straight toward him. She didn't say a word. She simply wrapped both arms around his waist. He knelt and held her tightly. "I made it," he whispered. "You did," she answered. "I wasn't in the front row." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "But you came." Those 3 words healed something inside him that 4 difficult years never could. Drew reached into his pocket and placed the blue toolbox keychain in her hand. The airport maintenance team fixed the ring. Molly studied it carefully. The scratches were still there. So were her original words. Then she noticed something else. Someone had carefully engraved 4 new words beneath them. "Sometimes home waits." She looked up. "I like it better this way." "So do I." Months passed. Claire kept every promise she had made. She testified under her own name. She submitted the original sensor data. She accepted the suspension of her professional certification instead of asking for special treatment. The investigation cleared Drew's record and restored his senior refrigeration certification. Other workers, whose files had been damaged by the same reports, also received new reviews. At Chicago Midway, Keisha introduced a new frontline safety policy. Any employee or qualified technician who identified a credible safety hazard could pause operations until the danger was evaluated. No one would have to choose between speaking up and protecting a career. Drew later accepted an offer to become a regional safety trainer, not because someone felt sorry for him, because his judgment had finally been recognized for what it had always been. 1 year later, on their way home from one of Drew's training sessions, Molly noticed a woman standing beside a grocery store parking lot, struggling to change a flat tire. She smiled and looked at her father. The toolbox is still in the trunk, right? Drew smiled back. It always will be. They pulled over together. Some acts of kindness never really end. They simply find the next person who needs them. When Molly looked up from her violin and found Drew standing quietly at the back of the auditorium, she didn't remember that he had missed the front row. She remembered that, when it mattered most, her father still came. Sometimes one courageous decision doesn't change the person who makes it first. It changes everyone whose life quietly grows from it. The price of doing what's right may be heavy, but the cost of staying silent can be far greater. The next time something in your heart tells you that something isn't right, don't ignore it just because everyone else walks by. Remember what Drew chose to do, even when it meant paying a personal price, because your courage today may protect people you'll never even meet. If this story touched your heart, leave a 1 in the comments. And tell me this: have you ever made the right decision even though you knew it would cost you something? I'd truly love to read your story. Until next time, take care of yourself, because the next ordinary moment might carry a life-changing choice you never saw coming.